The backstage corridor was cold. Audrey held the golden statue tight in her hands. She was 26 years old. 3 years ago, she had been a chorus girl in Gigi, rushing between costume changes and hoping someone would notice her in the back row. Now she held Hollywood's most prestigious award, Roman Holiday, her first starring role, and now she was an Oscar winner. She stood alone in the corridor. Applause and music seeped through the walls from the main auditorium, distant like a storm heard from inside. Her Givenchy gown fit perfectly across her shoulders. The black silk felt cool against her skin. Her hair was swept into that careful chignon Grazia de Rossi had perfected hours earlier. Her makeup was in place, though she could feel the powder settling into the fine lines around her eyes. From the outside, everything was perfect. But she couldn't breathe. The evening had started 6 hours earlier. She had arrived at the RKO Pantages Theater in a black Packard, waving to the crowds from behind rolled-up windows. The photographers had shouted her name, Audrey, Audrey. Over here, Audrey! The lights had been blinding, camera bulbs popping like small explosions. She had walked the red carpet with practiced grace, had stopped at the right marks for photos, had given the brief, charming interviews everyone expected, had smiled until her cheeks ached, had answered the same questions about Roman Holiday, about working with Gregory Peck, about how it felt to be nominated for her first film. Overwhelming, she had said to each reporter. Such an honor just to be nominated alongside these incredible actresses. Grace Kelly was nominated for Mogambo, Leslie Caron for Lily, Deborah Kerr for From Here to Eternity, Maggie McNamara for The Moon is Blue, veterans, established stars, women who belonged in that category. And then there was Audrey Hepburn, the unknown. Inside the theater, she had taken her seat in the third row, close enough to the stage to walk up it gracefully if her name was called, far enough back to disappear if it wasn't. The ceremony had moved slowly, presenter after presenter, award after award, each one building toward the major categories. She had barely watched. Instead, she found herself thinking about the first time she saw Roman Holiday in the screening room at Paramount. How strange it had been to watch herself on that enormous screen. To see Princess Anne looking back at her with her own eyes, her own voice, but somehow different, bigger, more certain, more beautiful than she had ever felt in real life. William Wyler had been there that day. The director had watched her watching herself and said quietly, "You see it now, don't you?" She hadn't known what he meant then. Now, sitting in the Pantages Theater, she thought she understood. She saw the difference between Audrey Kathleen Rustin from Brussels and this woman on screen who carried herself like royalty, who made people believe in fairy tales. The problem was, she still felt more like the first one than the second. When Mercedes Ruehl announced the nominees for Best Actress, Audrey's heart had stopped. Her name sounded different coming through the theater speakers. Formal, important, like it belonged among those other names. The envelope opened. A pause that lasted forever. And the winner is Audrey Hepburn, Roman Holiday. Time had fractured. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. Gregory Peck, sitting 2 seats to her left, had leaned over and kissed her cheek. "Congratulations, Princess," he had whispered. The same thing he used to call her on set. She had risen. The world had tilted slightly. One step, another. The aisle seemed impossibly long. Everyone was looking at her. All those faces turned in her direction, some smiling, some surprised, some calculating what this meant for their own careers. At the podium, accepting the Oscar from Jean Hersholt, she had felt strangely calm. The speech had come naturally. She thanked the Academy, thanked William Wyler, thanked Paramount, thanked Gregory Peck and everyone else who had believed in her when she hadn't believed in herself. She had meant every word. But even as she spoke them, part of her had felt like she was watching someone else give the speech. Someone who looked like her but was more confident, more deserving, more everything than she actually was. The photographers had crowded around afterward. More pictures, more questions, more smiles. She had held the Oscar and posed with it from every angle, had answered questions about what this meant for her career, what roles she hoped to play next, how she felt representing a new generation of Hollywood actresses. Through it all, the statue had grown heavier in her hands. Now, finally alone in this corridor, the weight of it felt unbearable. She thought of her mother, Baroness Ella van Heemstra, back in London. During the war, when they were hiding in Arnhem, her mother had made her practice ballet, positions in their tiny apartment. "Grace under pressure," she would say. "That's what separates the refined from the common. That's what survival looks like." Her mother had survived the war by teaching herself never to show fear, never to show pain, never to show anything that might be used against her. And she had taught her daughter the same lesson. But this wasn't survival anymore. This was success, and somehow that felt more dangerous. She thought of all the chorus lines she had stood in, All the casting calls where she had been dismissed before she even auditioned. All the directors who had looked at her and seen nothing special. Too tall, too thin. Not pretty in the conventional way, not enough curves, not American enough. She thought of the phone call from William Wyler's office. How sure she had been that it was a mistake, that they had meant to call some other Audrey, that someone would realize the error and take it all back. She thought of the first day on the Roman holiday set, how Gregory Peck had looked at her during their first scene together, not like she was a nobody pretending to be someone important. Like she was already Princess Anne. Like he believed in the character because he believed in her. That was the moment she had started to believe it might be real. That maybe she wasn't pretending anymore. Maybe she was actually becoming an actress. But winning the Oscar changed everything again, made it official, made it permanent, made it impossible to go back to being unknown. A door opened at the far end of the corridor. Voices spilled out, laughter. The sound of the after-party getting started. Someone would be looking for her soon. The winner needed to be at the party, needed to be gracious and charming and everything everyone expected from Oscar winner Audrey Hepburn. She looked down at the statue in her hands. 13.5 inches tall, 8.5 pounds of gold-plated bronze. His face was blank, serene. He looked like he had never doubted himself, never wondered if he deserved to be where he was. She envied him. The truth was she had never wanted to be famous. She had wanted to be good, good at something, good enough to matter, good enough to take care of her mother and herself and maybe have a little left over for dreams. But fame was different. Fame was everyone watching, all the time. Fame was being Audrey Hepburn even when she just wanted to be Audrey. Fame was carrying this moment, this statue, this expectation for the rest of her life. She heard her name being called from the party. Time to go back. Time to smile and pose and be gracious. Time to celebrate with people who were already calculating how to benefit from knowing an Oscar winner. She took a breath. The same kind of breath her mother had taught her to take during air raids. Deep and controlled and betraying nothing. She thought about Gregory Peck again. How he had treated her like an equal from the very first day. How he had never made her feel like she didn't belong. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe belonging wasn't something you waited for someone else to give you. Maybe it was something you decided for yourself. She straightened her shoulders, arranged her face into the expression the world expected. But this time, she tried to mean it. Tried to feel like the woman who deserved to hold this statue. The voices were getting closer. Someone was definitely looking for her now. But first, for just one more second, she let herself feel what she really felt. Not triumph, not joy, just the overwhelming weight of becoming who everyone expected her to be. And underneath that, something else. Something that surprised her. Relief. Because for the first time since she had stepped off the boat from London, she didn't have to prove herself anymore. She had won. They couldn't take that back. Whatever came next, whatever mistakes she made or roles she failed at or ways she disappointed people, she would always be the girl who won the Oscar for her first starring role. That was worth something, maybe worth everything. She touched the Oscar once more. Still cold, still heavy. But not a prison anymore. A reminder. A promise she had made to herself and somehow, impossibly, kept. The door at the end of the corridor opened wider. A publicist's voice called her name, more urgently now. They needed her for photos, for interviews, for all the things that came after winning. She walked toward the voices, toward the cameras, toward the rest of her life as the woman who had won it all and made it look effortless. The door closed behind her. The corridor fell silent again. In that silence lay the truth that no camera would ever capture. That winning and being happy were not the same thing. But they weren't opposites either. They were just different. And sometimes different was enough. Years later, people would remember that Oscar night as Audrey Hepburn's perfect triumph. The fairy tale moment when the chorus girl became a star. They would remember her grace, her speech, her smile. They would not remember the cold corridor, the shaking hands, the moment when she stood alone with her golden statue and learned the difference between getting what you want and knowing what to do with it. But she remembered. And eventually she was grateful for that moment, for the lesson it taught her about the weight of success, about the difference between performing and being, about the price of dreams and whether they were worth paying. That night taught her something that would serve her for the rest of her career, that being Audrey Hepburn was a choice she made every day, not a role someone else wrote for her. And in that backstage corridor, holding her Oscar in the dark, she chose to be worthy of it.